Welcome to Nightmares. Here we share spine-tingling stories perfect for those who love listening to scary stories while drifting off. If you love falling asleep to horror stories, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more bedtime tales. Hit the bell icon so you'll be the first to know when a new nightmare has been unleashed. And before you let sleep take you, tell us where you're tuning in from in the comments below. We love to know where you are listening. Now our story begins. "Hey, Ben," Larry called out as he passed Ben's station. "You got the headphones tonight?" Ben looked up from his crossword puzzle, the fluorescent lights reflecting off his glasses. "Nah, man. Left them in the locker. Thought I'd go old school, listen to the sweet pattern of the conveyor belts." Larry chuckled. "Your brain's gonna turn to mush with that white noise." "Could be worse," Ben said, shrugging. "Could be listening to your love songs." They shared a laugh, their voices echoing through the warehouse. It was just another night at the plant, the kind of night that stretched on like a yawn you couldn't shake off. Ben liked the quiet, though. It gave him time to think. Too much thinking, maybe, but it was better than the alternative. The first strange noise came a couple of hours in, just as Ben was starting to get into a rhythm with his sorting. A soft rustle, like someone moving through dry leaves, drifted in from the far end of the aisle. He paused, listening, but the conveyor belt's steady hum was all he could hear. He shrugged it off, chalking it up to his imagination playing tricks. Rats, maybe. The warehouse was old, and they had their share of critters. But the noise didn't stop. In fact, it grew louder, more persistent. He looked around, peering into the darkness between the towering shelves. The lights flickered for a moment, and Ben felt a shiver run down his spine. It was nothing, he told himself. Just the old wiring acting up again. But the rustling grew heavier, turning into something that didn't quite sound like scurrying rodents anymore. It was more deliberate, like slow, heavy footsteps, the kind a person might make if they didn't want to be heard. Ben stood up, his chair scraping the concrete floor. The sound echoed through the vast emptiness, and the footsteps grew quieter, as if the thing was listening. His heart began to thud in his chest. He picked up his flashlight and shone it into the aisles, but the shadows swallowed the light whole. The footsteps had stopped. The silence was thick, almost suffocating. He waited, his breath held, and the only sound was the distant buzz of the night's machinery. "Hey, Larry," he called out, his voice sounding too loud in the quiet. "You hear anything?" No answer. The warehouse was eerie in its emptiness. The other workers had gone home hours ago, leaving Ben to man the overnight shift with nothing but his thoughts and the never-ending line of boxes for company. He told himself he was being paranoid, that it was probably just the building settling or the wind playing tricks. But deep down, he knew it wasn't the wind. The warehouse was sealed tight against the elements, and the air was still as a crypt. The temperature dropped, and Ben felt a cold draft sweep through the aisles. He glanced over his shoulder, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. Something was definitely off. He could feel it, a presence that didn't belong. The silence grew heavier, pressing down on him like an invisible hand. He took a step back, the rubber soles of his shoes squeaking against the floor. As the cold grew more intense, Ben turned to look for the source of the draft. That's when he saw it. A shadow, tall and distorted, stretching along the floor from the aisle to his right. It didn't move like a shadow should. It stretched and twisted, reaching out towards him like a living thing. And as he stared, the shadow grew denser, more defined. He could almost make out the shape of limbs, too long and too thick to be human, moving just out of the light's reach. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. It was just his imagination. He'd read too many horror stories. But when he turned back to the conveyor belt, his stomach dropped. The exit was blocked by a wall of boxes that hadn't been there before. The shadowy figure had to be playing a prank on him. He'd just have to ignore it, keep working, and wait for it to get bored and leave. But the figure didn't leave. It grew bolder, the rustling sounds turning into the unmistakable creak of the floorboards under heavy weight. Ben's mind raced, trying to make sense of the impossibility unfolding before him. He glanced around the warehouse, looking for anything he could use to defend himself, his eyes landing on the fire axe mounted on the wall. It was his only hope. With trembling hands, Ben reached for the axe, feeling the cold metal handle against his palm. The figure took a step closer, the shadow's elongated limbs reaching out as if it were going to touch him. Ben's breath fogged in the frigid air as he tightened his grip on the axe, his body tense and ready to swing. He could almost feel its breath, hot and rancid, on the back of his neck. The figure stepped into the light, and Ben's blood ran cold. It wasn't a person, it was a creature, a monstrous hulk with limbs that ended in twisted claws. Its eyes glowed a sickly green, and it had a maw filled with teeth that looked more suited to a shark than anything that should be walking on two legs. It tilted its head, almost curiously, as if sizing him up. The creature took another step, and Ben knew he had to act. He swung the axe with all his might, aiming for the thing's torso. The blade sliced through the air, and for a moment he thought he'd hit it. But the creature was too fast, moving with an unnatural grace that defied its size. The axe hit the concrete with a clang, sending sparks flying. The creature hissed, and Ben could swear it was laughing at him. Panic set in, and Ben's survival instinct took over. He had to get out, to find a way around the boxes. He sprinted down the aisle, the creature's heavy footsteps thundering behind him. The warehouse had never felt so vast, the rows of boxes stretching on forever like a labyrinth designed to trap him. The cold grew more intense, his breath coming in ragged gasps, and he knew the creature was gaining on him. As he rounded a corner, Ben spotted a forklift parked against the wall. If he could just get on it, he might be able to outmaneuver the beast and find a way out. He leaped onto the seat, his heart racing as he started the engine. The creature roared in frustration as he sped away, the forklift's headlights bobbing up and down as it swerved through the aisles. Ben could feel its eyes on him, burning into his back. The game of cat and mouse continued, the creature playing with him, allowing him to think he had a chance before it would vanish into the shadows, only to reappear closer, more terrifying. Ben's mind raced with fear and determination, trying to outsmart the creature that seemed to know his every move. The chase grew more intense, the creature's footsteps now a constant thunder in his ears. He knew he couldn't keep this up forever. He had to find a way out, had to think of something, anything, that would give him the upper hand. The warehouse was a maze of shelves and boxes, but Ben had worked here long enough to know its every nook and cranny. He just had to remember where the emergency exits were, the ones that weren't blocked. His eyes darted around, searching for a path he hadn't taken before, a shortcut that might lead him to safety. And then he saw it, a small side door, partially hidden behind a pallet of supplies. It was a gamble, but it was his only shot. He turned the forklift sharply, the tires squealing, and headed straight for it. The creature roared, charging after him with renewed fury. Ben's hands were slick with sweat as he approached the door, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't dare look back. He just focused on the exit, the light at the end of the tunnel, the promise of freedom. The forklift smashed through the pallet, sending cardboard and plastic flying. The door was just a few more feet away, but as he reached for the handle, a scream pierced the night. Larry's scream. Ben's head snapped around, his heart dropping into his stomach. Larry, his friend, his coworker, stumbled into view, eyes wide with terror. The creature loomed over him, a twisted nightmare come to life. It raised a clawed hand, ready to strike. Ben watched, frozen in horror, as Larry's eyes met his own, a silent plea for help. The creature's arm swung down with the force of a wrecking ball, and Ben snapped out of his daze. He couldn't let Larry die. He threw the forklift into reverse, slammed his foot on the accelerator, and steered it straight at the creature. It looked up just in time to see the metal beast bearing down on it. With a snarl, it leaped aside, giving Larry a chance to run. But before he could run away, it slashed Larry across his chest, slicing him open, and he screamed. Then it turned to Ben. It wasn't finished with him. The creature lunged at the forklift, and Ben swerved, barely missing it. Ben's mind was a whirlwind of fear and grief. He had to get out, had to warn someone, had to live. He floored the gas, the forklift jolting as it picked up speed. The creature kept pace with him, its unnaturally long arms reaching for the vehicle's open sides. The emergency exit was just ahead, the light over the door flickering like a beacon in the night. Ben's eyes were glued to it, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. The The creature was closing in, its claws scraping the metal just behind him. He couldn't outrun it, couldn't fight it. The only option left was to make a break for the door. With a final burst of speed, Ben aimed the forklift at the emergency exit. The creature was right beside him now, its breath hot and foul, its claws swiping at his face. He ducked, his heart in his throat, and squeezed through the narrow opening. The forklift barely fit, scraping the sides of the doorframe, but he was through. He didn't dare to look back, didn't dare to see if the creature was following. He just focused on the outside world, the safety of the parking lot just beyond the warehouse. The door slammed shut behind him, cutting off the creature's roars. For a moment, Ben just sat there, the engine idling, his chest heaving. He'd made it. But at what cost? Larry was gone, and the creature was still out there. He had to get help. He had to tell someone what was happening. He jumped off the forklift and sprinted across the lot, the cold air a shock after the stuffy warehouse. His legs burned with the effort, but fear propelled him forward. He had to get to his car, had to get out of there. The creature's howl echoed through the night, a mournful sound that sent shivers down his spine. Ben reached his car, fumbling with his keys. He glanced over his shoulder, expecting to see the creature emerge from the warehouse, but the door remained shut. The silence was almost as terrifying as the noise had been. With trembling hands, he unlocked the car and jumped inside, slammed the door shut, and locked it again. He started the engine, the headlights cutting through the darkness, and peeled out of the lot. As he drove, he looked for his phone, hoping he didn't lose it in his escape from the warehouse. The creature's howl still echoed in his mind, a constant reminder of what was lurking in the shadows of the warehouse. He finally found his phone and punched in 911 with shaking fingers, his breath coming in quick, ragged gasps. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's voice crackled through the receiver. It's in the warehouse. Ben managed to get out. A creature. It's killed Larry. It's not human. Sir, calm down, the operator said, her voice a lifeline through the chaos. What is your location? He gave her the address, his voice barely above a whisper. Hurry, it's still there. The line went quiet for a moment before the operator spoke again. Police and emergency services are on their way. Stay safe, sir. Do not return to the warehouse. Ben nodded, though she couldn't see him, and hung up. His heart was racing, his thoughts a blur. He had to get somewhere safe, somewhere he could think. The local diner was about 2 blocks away, and it's open 24/7. He'd go there, wait for the cops, and figure out what to do next. The diner's neon lights beckoned him in, a beacon of normalcy in a night that had gone so horribly wrong. He sat in a booth by the window, his eyes glued to the road, watching for the flashing lights of the police cars. The waitress brought him a cup of coffee without asking. She could see he was in no state to order. The minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an hour. His mind was racing, trying to process what he'd seen. It couldn't be real, could it? It had to be some kind of hallucination, a prank gone wrong. But the cold, the fear, Larry's scream, it all felt too real. Finally, the wail of sirens pierced the night. 2 police cruisers screeched to a halt outside the warehouse, and officers piled out, weapons drawn. Ben watched them disappear into the building, his heart in his throat. They had to believe him. They had to find something, some proof that he wasn't going insane. Shortly, the police came out, looking grim. They'd found Larry, all right, dead, just as Ben had feared. But what Ben didn't know was that the security footage was a mess of static whenever the creature was near a camera. It was like the thing didn't even exist, except for the carnage it had left behind. As Ben watched 2 officers approach the diner, he was eager to tell them everything. They were eager to talk to him too.